most people who do it because they really, really very strongly feel like this is a better outcome for them. This is how they feel compelled to live their lives. And I do understand that there are these cases of detransitioners, and those stories haven't always been given a platform and voiced equally.
No, come on. The right amplifies them. They have to. It's the only way to justify their bigotry. You can't have an entire empire built on like, hey, trans bad, trans ideology, social contagion, it's a mind virus, all this kind of stuff, unless you have a couple people to be like, yes, yeah, I was fooled by the system too. Yes, I was brought into trans ideology, and it was terrible. The Hill was sold to me, especially The Rising. I know The Rising is supposed to be like, hey, look, we've got two people from different sides of the political aisle, and they're going to combine, and they're going to fight each other. But The Hill for a long time was kind of being sold as the mainstream progressive alternative to the liberal news and the conservative news. So instead of Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, ABC, we got The Hill, and The Hill's progressive. They support Bernie Sanders, and it supports a whole bunch of different progressive politicians in America. That's the kind of perspective we're supposed to get. And more, I'm seeing things like this. Why I support Florida's ban on gender-affirming treatment for minors, says Kat Cattinson.
Two panels of doctors appointed by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis voted to ban gender-affirming care for people under 18 in the state. The new rules will only apply to new patients. People already receiving gender-affirming care should not be impacted. Meanwhile, in Tennessee, Republicans introduced a measure proposing a similar ban, saying it is the legislature's responsibility to, quote, protect the health and welfare of minors.
The measure will be one of the first pieces of legislation taken up in Tennessee in 2023. Activists are calling the move an attack on the LGBTQ community.
There are procedures already in place that make sure that the type of haymaking that people are making around this type of care are well protected against. So I don't see it as the issue that people are trying to make it an issue of.
Joining us now to weigh in on this is Kat Cattinson, a detransitioned woman who testified at several of the medical board hearings in Florida. Kat, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're really glad to have this discussion with you. Why don't you talk about, what your objection to or support for prohibiting gender-affirming care is, and maybe share, your personal story or stake in this.
Sure.
Now, I'm just going to start by saying I'm not here to either condemn or vilify someone who has detransitioned or someone who's going through either their own introspection on the issue, that kind of stuff. That's not what I'm here to criticize. I'm here specifically to criticize The Hill, just as an organization, as well as the hosts for participating in this, in the concept of amplifying something that happens to very few people. It is the same thing if someone went on to a mainstream news program and was like, I have myocarditis from taking the vaccine. I've had heart complications. It makes me feel terrible. My life is horrible. Please help. And then you say, okay, so this is the person whose story we're going to focus on. We're going to talk about this person. Even though it only happens to a very small amount of people who take the vaccine, a very, very small amount, because any medicine which is given to a fucking large pool of people, we're talking hundreds of millions of people, yes, will have complications to a certain percentage. Any kind of medicine. Doesn't matter if it's a vaccine, doesn't matter if it's a form of surgery, chemotherapy, it'll have complications, especially if you multiply it by more people. So in this case, are we going to amplify the voice of the very small amount of people who have negative complications that come with the vaccine? That it would be the same thing to me, because again, I do not want to talk about, or I don't even have a right as a cis person to talk about people's own issues with gender dysphoria and their struggle with it. I don't go through that. That is something that I can identify with, so that is honestly something that I have to take a back seat to. But I can look at statistics, studies, research data, and I can look at what is going to have better outcomes, especially for trans people who are really being vilified by a lot of assholes on the internet right now. So based on that and that alone, I don't think you should have done this. And I say this to everyone involved, except for, of course, the guests, because they are just the guests on the show who wouldn't take that opportunity.
So first of all, the phrase gender-affirming care is very misleading. What the affirmation model entails, which is what I experienced and what a lot of detransitioners who testified also experienced, is that rather than when they go to the doctor asking for help with their gender dysphoria, it's not comprehensive care. Instead, they are affirmed as the opposite sex and put on a conveyor belt towards puberty blockers, hormones, and surgeries. So this bill in Florida, or this measure in Florida rather, was about minors receiving gender affirming care. And for them, it's particularly dangerous because children cannot consent to making irreversible changes to their body. And also the science, the Florida board ultimately decided to ban gender affirming care for under 18 because they reviewed the science and it is in fact experimental. Just because puberty blockers have been used for other conditions does not mean they're then safe to use for gender dysphoria. There's never been anything like clinical trials on this. And there's a lot of risks like osteoporosis, stunted brain development, infertility as well.
Kind of my right to.
So unfortunately, like, and again, this is one of those things where time after time, study after study, especially new ones that are just coming out this year. This was May 6, 2022. New study shows trans youth are extremely unlikely to detransition. 94% of trans youth in a sample identified as still identifies trans 5 years later. Conservatives and assorted anti-trans reactionaries like to claim that trans kids don't understand their own identities, and almost all of young trans people eventually end up identifying with their birth gender. But a new study is blowing that assertion out of the water. Published this month in the Medical Journal of Pediatrics, it reveals the findings of a 5-year longitudinal study of trans youth conducted by Princeton University's Trans Youth Project. Out of more than 300 young trans-identifying people aged 3 to 12, only 2.5% identified as cisgender at the end of that 5-year period. Only 2.5%. With 94% identifying as the trans girls, boys, and 3.5% identifying as non-binary still. This stands in sharp contrast to inflated figures cited by anti-trans pundits who often claim that a majority of trans youth will detransition and experience significant psychological distress as they return to presenting and living as their birth gender. This is one of those things, by the way, right now, you are seeing a pretty big fork in the road from the midterm elections where Republicans went so hard and so fucking expensive into really doing the whole vilifying trans people for money, vilifying the pundit class. They all fucking, I'm so happy to be a bigot and get paid for it. But honestly, politicians as well in certain areas being like, we have to make sure that we protect girls sports teams in school and make sure that these evil trans people don't go into girls bathrooms and all this kind of stuff. And it didn't work. It really showed you that this one issue was not resounding with the electorate. The electorate was not like, I care about this. I'm going to the voting booth to make sure that there is no longer little boys in girls' washrooms and something. I don't know. I'm confused. It wasn't a thing. People are worried about the same things they're always worried about, with the addition of abortion being a big thing this year. But in terms of the exit polling, inflation, jobs, war, healthcare, those kind of things. Yes, the same things that usually drive elections and the electorate, and crime, because you scare people about the crime. But there was not trans kids. It was not a thing. So as we go forward, and again, this is something where the medical evidence is so overwhelming. This is not something where you have to be like, hoo-hoo, I am going to virtue signal about what a good cis person I am, and I am better than the Republicans because I understand this. It's not that. It's just every major medical association in the United States agrees. The data is overwhelming. This is it has now at this point been a flood of just hey, another study came out in another country, in another time, in long periods, blah, blah, blah. And overwhelmingly, it's there's such a small percentage of people later in life who decide to detransition. Of those who decide to detransition, we're talking the 4% or less here, it's because of social stigma. That's when they're polled. That's what they respond with. And yeah, it's because people in their lives and around them, there's still a social stigma against trans people in that regard, especially in conservative circles. So yes, you'll be surrounded by people who are you probably shouldn't have done what you did. I wish you hadn't done that. Can you please stop? Blah, blah, blah. You're a girl, not a boy. Stop this. And it's super heartbreaking. That's the reality of the situation. These results suggest that retransitioners are infrequent. The Princeton study also concluded more commonly transgender youth who socially transition at early ages continue to identify that way. This doesn't mean that researchers believe retransition is so rare as to not be worth studying. To the contrary, they argue that understanding retransition is crucial for clinicians and families to help make them as smooth as possible for youth. And see, that's the thing. Like, this is the way that medical science works, and healthcare science especially works. They're not going to ignore that. It's not like, why doesn't anyone talk about people who want to detransition or no, they don't want to ignore that. They want to find out the reason why, because they don't want to incorrectly apply this shit. That's why. They don't want to like the exact thing the right is constantly saying about fucking the myths they talk about, like, oh, they're incorrectly fucking misgendering people, and tomboys are now being told that they're trans. They used to be Tulsi Gabbard is telling the story of how she was a tomboy. They don't want that. They're actively fighting against that because they want better outcomes. That's the whole purpose of this. That's the fucked up thing.
Understand that your transition story happened much later in life when you were about 28 years old?
Yes and no. So I started to identify as transgender when I was 13, but I was not affirmed by my parents, pediatrician, my peers. I was actually bullied for being gender non-conforming. And so, at the time,
horrifying.
It was really difficult not being affirmed, but it caused me to wait until I was an adult. I was in my mid-20s when I transitioned. And although there are still some irreversible side effects that I'm dealing with after detransitioning, it's much less severe than if I had been affirmed at 13.
Okay, so this is such a sad story, and it's so fucked up that The Hill did this, and that both of the hosts agreed to this entire segment. This whole thing, the framing of it from the ground on up, this is like, it's shameful.
If I had been on puberty blockers, etc., because then I could have lost my fertility. I could have
you're using this person.
Fractures and a bunch of other
is you taking advantage of somebody.
Health side effects that we don't
further
even know about.
Fear-mongering that will endanger children.
So I asked the question because I think for a lot of folks who are more libertarian-minded on either side of the aisle, one might say adults make decisions that they sometimes regret. Sometimes people get plastic surgery that they regret. There's obviously a lot of reporting right now about the trends away from the butt lifts that were very popular and are no longer popular. And I don't mean to conflate, obviously, this with what people go through when they transition.
But you just did.
They say, well, people make mistakes, but that's up for adults to do and decide on their own. And so the conversation has been very much focused on what to do about minors. But your own story doesn't seem to necessarily track with the concern here, given that you were not affirmed and didn't transition till you were an older adult. So I wonder how you see your own personal story as fitting in with a conversation about these laws.
Oh, hold up. No offense, bro, but saying Twitter is dying after a bunch of people on the right just got unbanned is major cope. Well, I saw Jordan Peters. He didn't spell his name right. Jordan Peters. Yeah, that one. Yeah, he's been unbanned. But you gotta admit, man. At the end of the day, Jordan Peterson. It was kind of of his own doing. I don't think unbanning Jordan Peterson is like a W. At least not the one you think it is. Because really, Lobster Daddy, he was just like really horny on Maine, and he was horny posting, and he was just straight up like, would not smash. No authoritarian leader can make me succumb to the temptation. Fat, do not want. And then, like, even you and your crew, you clowned on him. Everyone clowned on. We were all clowning on him. That was the great left-right alliance for a little while. We had that whole like detente. We were all just fucking, this guy's he's hilarious. He's horny on Maine and doesn't know that he can't log off. But he was banned on Twitter because he wouldn't delete a tweet. He said he'd sooner die than delete the tweet. You remember that? Were you inspired by that speech when he went up to YouTube? He's like, up yours, woke moralists. I'll sooner die than delete it. Yeah, we'll see who cancels who. You're like, whoa, fucking, this is hard. Whoa, yeah, all right, my dude, we're going to war. Okay, I deleted the tweet, but I said I would never do it, so I'm screenshotting the tweet that I could not delete. It's so sad. It's so goddamn sad. All I'm saying, my dude, is that there's better, I would say, what's the word? Daddies. Yeah, there's better daddies that you could pick than the one you got back. So you got that one back. And Babylon B, I mean, fucking Elon Musk, that's his shit. He loves Babylon Bee. That makes perfect sense to me. Of course, it's all part of that whole like Peter Thiel circle. He finds them funny because they say like really epic jokes. Like Elon Musk is like super based and has a huge cock. That'll be like a Babylon Bee joke. There's like Babylon Bee, your writers. Sorry, you get the day off. I just gave the whole staff the day off. So you just make a post and it's like Elon Musk, fucking monster cock genius whose brain is only outsized by his dick. Boom, and then a picture of Elon Musk on there with like this massive cock. There you go. That's the entire Babylon Bee fucking news cycle for a full 24 hours. So you can have fun with that one.
Laws that are coming down the pike and or have been enacted in Florida and are on the table in Tennessee.
So of the detransitioners who testified in Florida, I think there were maybe 10 or 11 of us altogether. And so far, just 2 of us had transitioned as minors. But I think the fact that so many people are transitioning as adults and regretting it and having irreversible effects that they have to deal with for the rest of their life, I think it just illustrates the fact that children definitely are too young to do this. They cannot consent to this. And furthermore, even adults who are transitioning, a lot of us are coming from a place of severe mental illness and distress. And so it was almost like we felt like we didn't have another choice and we weren't presented with any other options.
The hell, why are you doing this?
Just because someone's
Rising,
an adult, I don't
why are you doing this? This segment is so gross.
if they are in a state of severe distress.
You've talked.
This is exploiting someone and their trauma in order to push a far-right narrative that is basically vilifying trans people. That's the entire framing of this segment. It's disgusting.
Previously about what you perceive to be the ease at which you were prescribed testosterone over the phone, I think. Can you speak about that?
Yes. So a lot of people tell me that this couldn't have happened, but actually, if you visit,
if like less than 5% of people, especially children, decide to detransition later in life, so that we are speaking about a very small amount of people, and those small amount of people, the ones who do, overwhelmingly say the reason is societal pressure. If you focus the whole story on that, you ignore everything else, because at the time when this is being made, this is a period in human history, I'm sorry, where the right is effectively trying to go after trans people. That hasn't changed. That hasn't turned off. They're still trying to fucking erase them from the face of the earth. So if you give the framing to that, whose benefit is that going to go? This is the Hill. This is supposed to be the progressive answer to fucking NBC. And this is the kind of story they do. If this was on fucking Fox News or fucking the Daily Wire, I would understand it better. It would make more sense to me.
Website, they do claim that they do telehealth, and they also say that they prescribe hormones on the first appointment without a requirement for a letter from a mental health provider. So I did go through Planned Parenthood, and for me, it was about a 30-minute phone conversation before I was prescribed testosterone. And I do recall
the Hill wasn't actually progressive.
The doctor listing a few of the risks, but it was very brief, and I feel like it was largely downplayed to the point where I did not realize how experimental the care was. Like I thought the science was a lot stronger than it actually is.
Hey, what up, Dark Native? Everyone go to
Twitch.tv/Dark
Online Health
Native,
spelled N8V.
Gender detransitioning is when a person who has already transitioned returns to their life as the gender they were assigned at birth. According to the most recent national survey in 2015, of nearly 28,000 people, 8% of respondents reported some kind of detransition. But of that 8%, 62% reported doing so only temporarily due to societal, financial, or
Thank you. Thank fuck. Holy shit. Bree. I was like, is this whole thing gonna end and conclude and be like, horrifying. Horrifying. Yes. Can't believe it. Anyways, we got a funny segment coming up. Stay tuned. Like and subscribe. We got like, oh, okay.
Family pressures. So I have a lot of sympathy. I mean, I've read you, your writing or talking interviews about how you're a singer and how you specifically requested a low dose of testosterone because you wanted to preserve your voice. You weren't sure what the effects were going to be on your voice, and that they in fact they prescribed you twice as much as they would normally have prescribed. I'm not sure.
Okay, so you don't get to sugarcoat this shit. You don't get to like start out and be like, hey, by the way, here's the actual facts. Like a huge amount of people who actually transition, the majority of, like the overwhelming, like we could say Almost all of them. Almost every single person who transitions and gets gender affirming care doesn't regret it. And of the people who do regret it, the ones reporting say it's because of societal pressure. And even of that percentage, there are people who don't even permanently detransition. There are people who retransition. So again, we're talking about a small fraction of a thing. And now, can I highlight how horrifying this event was that I'm now going to exploit here on The Hill, The Rising, to talk about how your voice changed because you were double prescribed. Like, let's get back to the fear mongering.
If that was an error or what was happening there. But again, I have sympathy, you know, on a human level for what you've gone through. I guess my question, my hesitation here is how much of this is a generalized medical malpractice issue. There are people who are overprescribed psychiatric medications and
I like my favorite like Hill clips now are obviously like Oyemi just like rips into this motherfucker, but it's always so funny just seeing him there just like all clean cut, and like whenever there's like, you know, things are tipping a little bit in the way he likes, he's just like, this is good.
Things like that, and how much of this is part of what seems to be a larger cultural project of raising up trans people and trans issues by conservatives in a way that doesn't seem to be as calculated to actually make the lives of people who are struggling with gender identity issues better. I mean, do you feel any of that dissonance?
Yes. So a lot of times I get called, you know, a right-wing conservative, or that I just don't care what happens to trans people. You know, I don't have any compassion for them. And it really couldn't be further from the truth. Like, I want people with trans identity who are struggling with gender dysphoria, like, I want the best possible care for them. And if I could, I just want to remark on that survey, because the survey from 2015, because the population that was being surveyed in that study was a population that still identifies as trans. And we know from other research, a study by Lisa Littman in 2021, and also another study by Ellie Vandenboos in 2021, that the vast majority of detransitioners no longer identify as trans. So that study by Jack Turbin,
yes, but that is by definition what you would be looking for if you were searching in a study for that determinant. Like if you were like, hey, by the way, we need to find out whether or not people who detransition, do they identify as trans anymore? No, they do not. Wow, congratulations. Like, there has been so many studies recently, especially, that have been coming out, especially in the last year. That one that I was just showing you earlier in this, like, you know, little segment, they specifically look at whether trans kids, because that was the last gap, because gender affirming care shouldn't apply, because at the end of the day, trans kids don't know what they want, they're going to regret it later. This is the big myth. We're going to continue to tell you we can't do gender affirming care on kids because they don't know what they want. And the people who are usually saying that don't even realize the people who are getting gender affirming care as kids, if you were speaking about a certain age, usually before fucking like 10 years old, they're not talking about medical interventions. They're talking about gender affirming things, like you can grow your hair long, you can use different pronouns, you can be called by the name that you want, stuff like that, like stuff that really shouldn't bother anyone. It's the most harmless thing in the world. It's like someone wanting to be able to call their little girl a little girl, and that like makes her feel better and makes her feel safer, it makes her feel happy. What is wrong with you to think that like you should step in and stop that process? That it's almost sick in my mind that anyone would think that. But the people who do end up getting medical interventions and do take puberty blockers and do perhaps get mastectomies, they don't regret it. The overwhelming majority don't. Like we have so much data in this field now. So this is why it's like it's so weird to continuously amplify that story or that position that, hey, you should be scared about this. Like if you asked me about this Hill segment, what would have been the best way to approach this? If like it's like, Lance, you have to do this segment, sit there and you know, interview this person, but from a lefty perspective, try to do it, you know, in trans rights kind of stuff. I would say you should not have done this. Just across the board, you should not have done, like, this is a Fox News framing. This is a Breitbart framing. You know, this is OWN. This is the right. Why I support Florida's ban on gender affirming treatments for minors. Interview. We have to give the voice to the person who's going to obviously talk about how this is a terrible thing because they went through a bad experience.
Who's also being funded by one of the companies that manufactures puberty blockers. It leaves out the vast majority of detransitioners. So it's actually not an accurate reflection of how many people detransition. But anyway, I'm just saying that because I would like to see the best quality of care for both trans-identified people and detransitioners. But as it stands right now, we need much better science, particularly about the long-term effects on physical and mental health.
Please push back on this.
Are you concerned about the effects? I mean, the rejoinder that people have is that even granting, the other study that you brought up, it does seem like the majority of people, like in the world we live in today, where there's so much cultural pressure, quite honestly, against being trans. Obviously, there's a great deal of stigma. I don't think most people wake up one day and say, I want to challenge myself by moving through the world in a way that I know that's going to get me a lot of social critique. Because that's the case, most people who do it because they really, really very strongly feel like this is a better outcome for them. This is how they feel compelled to live their lives. And I do understand that there are these cases of detransitioners, and those stories haven't always been given a platform and voiced equally.
No, come on. The right amplifies them. They have to. It's the only way to justify their bigotry. You can't have an entire empire built on like, hey, trans bad, trans ideology, social contagion, it's a mind virus, all this kind of stuff, unless you have a couple people to be like, yes, yeah, I was fooled by the system too. Yes, I was brought into trans ideology, and it was terrible.
In the public sphere. But I wonder if you're concerned at all about whether or not there is a trade-off that's happening where the majority of trans people who do want to transition and do want to be affirmed, even if it's to be called by the name of their choice and be allowed to wear the clothes of their choosing, are going to not be able to do so, and that has its own corresponding health and social wellness and mental health implications.
So again, I don't think we have, I mean, anecdotally, yes, many people say they are happy after transition, but I think the problem is that other options to treat gender dysphoria are not being researched. And also, you mentioned how difficult it is to be trans.
No, I'm sorry, but there's not, like, you don't walk into a doctor's office. I know this because I've spoken directly to trans people who have gone through the process of transitioning in the Canadian medical system. You do not speak to a doctor, and the only option before you is basically hormones and surgery. It's like, oh, okay, so welcome. Yes, so you have, what is it, gender dysphoria? Okay, so we are basically going to now schedule you an operation for later today, and also you will have access to all of the finest hormones, and this is how the process works. And these are the only things we know. We have never thought of another thing possible to talk to you about. So yeah, that's it. No, that's not it at all. These, especially if it happens to be surgeries, happen under multiple consultations, like an overwhelming amount of, hey, by the way, you have to consent to this, you have to be able to do the research, here are pamphlets, here's websites, here's information on what you're undergoing, you have to be completely sure that this is something that you want, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's like all forms of healthcare. If you have had a surgery in your life, if you've had an operation in your life, you don't just walk into a doctor's office and you're like, my stomach hurts. And the doctor's like, oh shit, well, that's probably your appendix. I'll take it out. Oh, cool. Operation, please. And then you just lie down and then like things start. Like, that's not how that works. It's like, oh, my stomach hurts. Oh, interesting. Okay, so let's ask you a bunch of questions. Let me feel you. I'm now going to say that you should probably get some tests. Here, we're going to take a stool sample. We're going to get an x-ray. We're going to have to get this done, blah, blah, blah. And then after that, it's like, okay, so based on the test, we're just not entirely sure, but we're going to look into it more. And then boom, after that, it's like, okay, so we think we've isolated the problem. This might be a deficiency of X, and now you need Y, something like that. Like, that's the process you go down. It's not like you walk into a doctor's office and it's like, I don't know if I'm a boy or a girl. Surgery, now, begin.
And I don't deny that, but I think a lot of it has to do with culture's reaction to gender nonconforming people in general. Like, to put it simply, masculine women and feminine men, they tend to get treated like the bottom of the barrel in society. And a lot of the time, the reason why people want to transition is to escape that discomfort by then passing as the opposite sex. And so it's a complex issue, and I definitely don't want to prevent anyone from getting the best care that will lead to the best outcomes for mental health. But I just don't think we're looking at all options to treat gender dysphoria. And I also think we need to work as a broader society to accept people for how they are naturally, so that people don't feel forced to start hormones and get surgeries.
Well, Kat, thank you so much for joining us.
All right. Well, I guess that's where our work is done. Cool. All right, so let's just put that out there in the marketplace of ideas and see where it lands. See what people do with it. Hopefully it'll all be good. Really good. God fucking damn. The Hill, you should be ashamed of yourselves. The company, everyone from the ground on up who fucking made this possible. You're part of the problem, I say.
Do you enjoy the Serfs but prefer not to have to use your eyeballs? Many are saying this. Well, we've got the solution for you. It's the Serf Times in podcast form. Available on most major podcasting networks now. If you enjoy it, please consider leaving a good review and feedback because it really helps the show out, apparently, and it's free, just like the podcast.
To our gods, Xander Corvus and Peyton L. Juste, we shall spend many a generations building mighty cathedrals in your honor. To our monarch, Tom Spiker, we are but your oafish jesters, here to offer you a laugh at any opportunity. To our brave knights of the Round Table, Rachel K., Izzy Solidarity, Victoria Bell, Sebastian Demmel, Mark Harmon, Benji Arney, Scary Earth Human, Tony, DM Rivera, Resident Scarecrow, Sir Nickus, Cheryl Alvarez, Ruby Kelly, Brandon, Words Greenwood, Everything Important, Hegbert Celine, Matthew Scarborough, Stellar Vision, Ariane McCarthy, Doug Cady, Daniel Sutton, Jenna Tao, Dark Puppy, Quiet One 85, Anna Loves Riley, Omni, Riley and Anna, Poodlehawk, Multimondi, Trevbot EXE, Brian Ephraim, Anthropophojack, Catherine, Ramon Acosta, Incosin, Ralph Parler, Violent Orchard, Political Puppy, La Media Panza, Todd Buckingham, and Todd La Jeunesse. We salute our valiant heroes off to fight injustice everywhere.